welcome back to my channel, Beautiful Minutia. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany, and today I'm starting a new weekly reading vlog for the month of February. So today is Sunday, February 18th, maybe? 19th? 20th? Somewhere in that range. I'm having trouble remembering the date, but it's Sunday, and I have just finished What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher. And what a ride that book was. If I didn't have other reading obligations, I'm pretty sure I could have finished that in like one sitting because the writing is so compelling and just sucks you right in. It is a horror, and it is based on Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe. So there are definitely some very unsettling moments, and it gets a little bit more grotesque as you get towards the end. So if that sounds like that's something that's not your jam, then don't pick it up. But I'm a horror wimp, and I was okay, although I did decide to stop reading it at night when I got about halfway through because it was starting to get a little more creepy and I just didn't want to have weird dreams. But I thought that it was so well done and so respectful in the cues that it took from Fall of the House of Usher while still making the story T. Kingfisher's own. I am doing a full spoilery vlog for my Patreon, so if you're interested in hearing more in-depth thoughts on that video will be coming out. Actually, by the time this vlog goes live, it's probably already live on my Patreon, but that's why I'm not discussing it super in-depth here, because I have already recorded clips that are very in-depth there. It is actually also a weekend reading challenge weekend for my Patreon. Since Monday is President's Day, I decided to do a Saturday through Monday instead of I normally do a Friday through Sunday. So it's structured just a little bit differently this time. I had made a goal of 400 pages and I am doing real well on that. I think I'm going to end this day probably with around 300 pages, maybe a little bit more, depending. It's still the afternoon, so I've still got plenty of time, but I'm gonna let you know what else I'm reading this week. I am still cooking along in The Vicar of Wakefield by Oliver Goldsmith, and as you can see, I am doing real well. I have less than 100 pages left in this. I'm so enjoying this, and I was not expecting to. Well, that's a lie. I was expecting to enjoy it. I wasn't expecting to just love my time with it. It feels so much like a Jane Austen in terms of the drama and in terms of the humor. It feels so much like that, and I really wasn't anticipating that. So that is so fun. I really, really love that. I've been enjoying truly like every moment of reading this book. So I will finish it this week. I'm pretty sure. I can't remember exactly how many days we have left, but I'm reading this with Stephanie from Miss Richards Reads, Adia from Novel Idea, and we're reading 3 chapters a day. So this will be finished this week. Another book that will finally be finished this week. I will probably finish it before I'm supposed to finish it because I've read a little bit ahead this weekend, is The Pickwick Papers by Charles Dickens. I have 7 chapters and about 100 pages left, so I am going to finish this bad boy this week. I am ready to be done with it. I've enjoyed my time with it, but it's not a very compelling Dickens for me. It's just more like fun and lighthearted and humorous, which is fine, but it doesn't have the punch for me that a lot of Dickens do in terms of the way he ties things together and all that kind of stuff. It feels a lot more scattered and episodic than a lot of Dickens that I've read, and this is his very first work, so it's fine that it's not up to par with some of his other works, but I've had a good time with it. I've been reading it with Penny and Chantel from Chantel Reads all day, and I'm going to be using some of my weekend reading challenge time to make a little more headway in this one. I'm actually a couple chapters ahead right now because I read ahead last night. Another main focus this week is The Two Towers by Tolkien. I don't even have a bookmark in here. I think I'm 3 chapters in. Yeah, I'm 3 chapters in, which is not very far, about here. So I have a lot more to read before my discussion with my Patreon, and that's not until like the week after this week, so I have plenty of time. But as always, enjoying my time with this. The Two Towers was my favorite movie of the 3, but I never really like ranked the books, so I'm kind of wondering if this is going to be my favorite book of the 3, or I'm not really sure. I've never really thought about it before. So I am really enjoying being back here though, as always. The book that I am starting this week is The Double by Fyodor Dostoevsky. I'm reading this with Christy Lewis from Dostoevsky in Space and Penny. And this is one of Dostoevsky's short stories or novellas. I'm actually not quite sure how long it is, but I'm really looking forward to reading this with these ladies. It's been a little while since I've read a Dostoevsky, and I am very ready to read another Dostoevsky. So I think that this is going to be really enjoyable. I have no idea what the premise of it is, but I do anticipate probably starting and finishing it this week, but we'll just kind of have to see how that goes. I'm still working on a few nonfictions as well. I am reading Fast Feast Repeat, which is a book about intermittent fasting that I'm finding really, really interesting. And then I am reading The Way to Pentecost by Samuel Chadwick. This is a book about the power of the Holy Spirit. Really enjoying this one, but I haven't picked it up in a little while, so hopefully I can pick it back up this week. I was trying to finish up some of the books that I was reading, because if you saw my vlog from last week, I was reading 8 books, and then at the end of that vlog I was still reading 7, and now I'm reading 6 because I finished What Moves the Day. I'm also cooking my way right along with Romantic Outlaws. This is actually my main audiobook. I've read some of it physically, but every time I listen I go back and flip through the chapters because there's pictures and stuff. But I am 44% of the way through this book, and I was not anticipating being able to complete so much of this in the month of February. It was just kind of like an add-on, and I was kind of thinking that I wasn't going to be able to get very far in it with all the other books I have going on, but it is so fascinating. I am just really enjoying my time here, even though some of it is difficult, I think, in terms of like what Mary Shelley and Mary Wollstonecraft went through and the way that they were treated, and subsequently some of the choices that they made morally that were really questionable. I think that some of that was because people around them were kind of predatory, and some of it was also just because of how ill-treated they've been. They wanted to distance themselves so far from the things that were kind of touted as like the goal, like marriage and those kinds of things. They started seeing them as like archaic and outdated because they saw how that was used to kind of like entrap and mistreat women and treat women more like property than like partners and spouses. So I can see how they went the way that they did, and it's really sad to read about a lot of the things that they went through as a result of those things. So I find it really, really fascinating, and a lot of the beliefs that they were perpetuating at the time period that they lived in is so surprising to me. I guess it just shows that there's nothing new under the sun when we think that the people living a certain way, we're like, wow, that's a new, like, it's a newer thing, and it's really not. It's been going on really for forever. But I think we have this idea of what like Regency era ideals looked like, although Mary Wollstonecraft was pre-Regency era, but we have this idea of what that looks like. But there was a lot of people who were just exploring different things and different freedoms, and there's a lot of talk, especially with Mary Wollstonecraft, that she was in Paris for the French Revolution. She was in Paris when Marie Antoinette was beheaded, and she stayed there because she wanted to see history being made, and she wanted to see freedom and liberty, and then how that then translated to how freedom and liberty should look within relationships and should look for men and women in a lot of different ways, not just freedom to be able to not be under a monarchy, but freedom and choices of morality and things that had long been held as this was the right and proper way to do things. It was like they took it to such an extreme, these levels of freedom. So it's just really, really interesting to read about their experiences in these times. I might also start Dr. Thorne by Anthony Trollope this week too, because I was supposed to read that with Stephanie and Penny. All the reads with Stephanie and Penny this month. None of them like together except for Dr. Thorne, but I was like reading these books over here with Penny and these books over here with Stephanie, and Dr. Thorne was like the book where I was reading with both of them. So I am not sure if I'm gonna get to it or not. February has ended up being kind of jam-packed, but my March is even more jam-packed. So if I don't start it this week, I won't start it till April. So we'll just see how the week goes. If I can finish Pickwick Papers sooner rather than later, then that means that my focus books this week would be The Two Towers, The Double, and then I would probably also start Dr. Thorne. So I'll let you know what I end up starting and what my thoughts are. Hello my friends, it's now Friday and my intention was certainly to update you after my weekend reading challenge with my Patreon and let you know how it went, but that's not how this week went. So I went well over my 400 page count goal. I actually hit 400 pages by Monday morning. So that went really, really well and I'm glad because the rest of this week has been really crazy and I haven't had hardly any time to read it all, but I have finished a couple of things that I'm going to talk about. First of all, I did read The Fall of the House of Usher. I read that in conjunction with What Moves the Dead, but when I recorded my other clip, I hadn't read it yet, but it was really, really fun to read that and make the comparisons between the two. I've really enjoyed that. It was a reread for me because Fall of the House of Usher was one of my favorite Poe stories. It was my very favorite when I was a teenager and when I was really, really into Poe. And as an adult, I've had a few that have creeped up above that, but it's still one of my favorites. Next up, I told you I was gonna try to finish early the Pickwick Papers, and I did finish this, and I really liked the ending of it. I love how Dickens does endings and how he brings in all the loose threads and ties them together. But still, I think this is definitely his first published novel. I think I said earlier it's his first published work. It is not his first published work, but it is his first published, like, cohesive novel, and it's not as cohesive as it could have been in terms of there being like overarching themes and plots and like all these things, there are some storylines that carry throughout, but they're not as strong as his subsequent books. This definitely feels more episodic, which when you have someone who is doing like periodical publishing like Dickens did, that probably makes sense and it was probably really popular at the time. But for me, that's just not my preference. I prefer a more cohesive story. So I did really like this. I enjoyed my time with it. I laughed a lot, but it ranks as my least favorite Dickens so far. I've not yet read all of his works, but I've read all except I think like three or four? I think three. I think I have three left to read. And so this is my least favorite, but I still enjoyed my time with it. I don't know if it's one that I would reread unless I'm reading it with someone, which was really fun to read this with Chantel and Penny because when things were funny, we were messaging each other being like, oh, this line was funny or this situation was funny. And I don't think I would have enjoyed it as much if I was reading it by myself and didn't have people to laugh about it with together. But I still thought it was really fun and I still enjoyed it. I still like Dickens' writing. But I think for me, one of the weakest points of this was that there were so many stories within the story where all of a sudden someone's like, they're at a tavern and someone's gonna tell a story and you're just like, this has no bearing on the plot. It has literally not even a little bit of a point. It's not like this is contributing to the themes of the book or is some sort of morally allegorical tale that's supposed to help the main character. It's like people are just telling stories, and it felt like Dickens had a bunch of short stories that he didn't know what to do with, and so he just stuck them in this book as short stories so that they would be in there and he'd have a place to use them. And that for me was one of the weakest points in this story. Even though I did enjoy some of the stories, they pretty much always felt out of place, and I just didn't enjoy them as much. So I think that that was another weak point for me. I also finished The Vicar of Wakefield by Oliver Goldsmith, and my goodness, I really enjoyed this book so much. I read this with Stephanie and Dia, and it was just so wonderful. I love the character of the vicar, and I love the family dynamics that we have in this. We have family who is just really close-knit and have just really loving relationships, and that carries throughout. And I really like that. And I like the vicar, just all these bad things happen, and it's very reminiscent of Job in my opinion. And I just really loved how he spurred his family on to fight for joy and contentment in their circumstances, regardless of what was happening to them, regardless of what they lost. He tried so hard to keep that positivity alive and a focus on family and being grateful for being together and for what they had and all those kinds of things. And their family dynamic in terms of like the conversations they would have and the way they would laugh together and do things together reminded me so much of my own upbringing, where we were always laughing together and we would be doing silly rhymes or making up songs or doing silly things together, but then we'd also have serious, deep theological discussions at the dinner table. And so it was a mix of both, and I really saw that in the vicar's family, and I really enjoyed that. I thought that that was really wonderful. There were a few twists towards the end that I didn't see coming that I thought were really good, and a few twists that I didn't see coming that I didn't think were good. So there were elements to the ending that kind of, I just didn't really like how Oliver Goldsmith resolved this and how he put certain things in there. And I saw Anne from In Search of Wonder talking about this, and she said that the ending was a little too neat, and it felt like every character who had been part of the story just walks in at the end and provides a piece of the puzzle, and it all comes together in that way. And I agree that it was definitely had like a neat ending, but it wasn't necessarily a satisfactory ending on all fronts. Some of it was really satisfactory, and some of it was very unsatisfying. And I was thinking, this is going to be a perfect book for me. And then the second to last chapter, just some of it I found really unsatisfying. But overall, I really loved it. It's like I'm tempted to still say that this is a 5-star, even though it's not perfect, and I tend to reserve that for a 5-star. So maybe I need to give it 4.5, because I really loved it. And I really want to read some more books by Oliver Goldsmith because his writing style was perfect and beautiful. I really loved almost every single second in this book. I loved the vicar's, you know, holding to his standards and his love and compassion and forgiveness for everyone. Most of the time he was not very preachy about that. I mean, there was like once or twice where he felt a little bit like he was preaching, but there were moments that were just so beautiful about forgiveness, and particularly his view of people who were in prison that society had pretty much written off, that he saw them as of value and worth spending his time and effort on in an effort to actually reform them, instead of them being people who just immediately head to the gallows, or they get arrested and they get out of prison, they get back in prison, and there's this vicious cycle. And it was really interesting to me because that's what we see today, at least in the United States, that our prison system, it seems very focused on just getting people in and then out, and then they come back in, and there's not as much effort within the actual prison system itself a lot of times in focusing on actually reform and having these people being able to live good and productive lives and be able to move past what brought them to prison in the first place, particularly with drug offenses. I feel like that's something that we see a lot, where it could be something where we're actually trying to help people, but instead it just feels like this in and out thing in a lot of places. I'm sure not every single prison in the United States is like that, but that's something that you see a whole lot, and people just going right back to the life that they had beforehand, and the vicar seeing people as like human beings created in the image of God who deserve to hear the gospel and have a chance at some sort of success in life. And by success, I don't mean like making a ton of money, but actually deserving a chance to move forward in their life and not have to continue to repeat the same follies over and over and over again. That was a message I was not expecting to see in a book of this time period that I just really appreciated. And apparently the prison systems were even worse in that time than they are now in terms of just what was an offense worth being thrown into prison for. It could be like anything, and it could just be on someone say so, and there didn't need to be any sort of evidence or trial or anything like that at all. Dia was talking about that because she had a footnote in her book that was talking about the prison system at the time and how atrocious it was. So I just thought that that was really interesting and was not like a section of this book that I was expecting to be there. There was just so much talk about that kind of stuff, and then also talking about suffering in kind of the scheme of, you know, joy and in heaven someday, that those who have experienced a lot of suffering in life now, heaven will seem like such a reprieve for them, but for those who are experiencing joy now, heaven will be a continuation of joy. And so looking at heaven from both of those perspectives, I just really loved it. There was so much about it, so much beauty in it that I just really, really appreciated. I did start some books this week as well, but honestly, I'm not very far in them, so I'm not even really going to talk about them. I think I'll just kick off my next vlog by talking about them more, because I don't have very much to say right now, because like I said, I didn't get as much reading done in the second half of this week as I did in the first part with my reading challenge. So I'm going to wrap this up here, but I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you've read any of the books that I have read, I would just love to hear your thoughts, if you agree or disagree, and tell me what you've been reading lately as well. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like and also subscribe so you can continue to see more bookish content from me, and I will see you again next time.